So we talk to people on the phones just about every day, and we look at police reports and go over what the officers write in the reports. And people think, "Why am I guilty?" based on what the police officer wrote in that report. But there's a lot more that goes into it than just the report. There's mistakes in those reports just about every day. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I would say errors in police reports are very common. Um, while all errors aren't created equal, there are some very important errors. For example, in a DUI case, the personal contact phase of a DUI investigation is very important, and those observations are very important. And errors happen very, very frequently. I would say the most common errors we get are observations that an officer writes in a police report, and then when we look at the body camera, they just aren't apparent in the body camera. We watch the body camera, they allege slurred speech, and we watch the video and people sound fine, or red watery eyes, and we will screenshot the video and show that this person does not have red watery eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's times where, we've had hearings and we'll ask the officer, raise your hand when you see, the person has slurred speech, or raise your hand when they're unsteady on the feet. And then you play the video, they don't raise their hand, and they don't raise it for a reason because their report, they may not align with the video. It's always important to remember that those reports are under oath, right? The same oath that the officer takes when they have a hearing. So anything that they say in that report is a credibility issue if they say it under oath and it turns out not to be true on the body cam.
So what's the most common error you see in police reports?
So there's many. There's some that we've discussed already. And then another issue that is not as commonly discussed is each of these police reports have to, or an arrest warrant, has to state all the essential facts of every element of the offense, meaning DUI. It has to show that you were driving or in physical control, that you were under the influence, and that you were on a public roadway. If there are no facts to assert any of those elements, then it's a Rule 3 argument. And what that means is that there's a argument that the case may be dismissed. We can ask the judge to dismiss the case for not stating all of those essential facts, for coming to a legal conclusion. If it just says the motorist was or the defendant was driving the vehicle under the influence on a public roadway, that is not sufficient. It has to state what the roadway was to establish that it was a public roadway. It needs to establish they were under the influence because they had an odor of alcohol, they had slurred speech, unsteadiness on feet. It has to establish those facts. Otherwise, we can ask the judge to dismiss the case. And we've done it in the past in plenty of cases. And there's case law in the state of Tennessee that says that you are entitled to the case being dismissed. There are also reasons why we may not argue that, if you want to talk about that. In some cases where, they may not have the essential facts, but we still sometimes don't necessarily argue that motion. Is there a reason why?
So sometimes a Rule 3 argument is not in a defendant's or a client's best interest. It could be a situation where the case was mischarged in general sessions and the prosecutor is going to charge it higher, which would increase the bond. But when a case is dismissed, a prosecutor can always bring it through the grand jury and into criminal court. And in doing so, the client is going to have to be rearrested and rebooked, and a new bond is going to be set and be made in order to not remain in custody. So that's definitely one of the risks of asking for a case to be dismissed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess the only time that we necessarily would argue that motion is if it's after a year, for example, on a misdemeanor. The statute of limitations to have a lawful arrest warrant or charging document is 1 year. So if we're able to prolong the case knowing that this is an issue until after the year is done, then we get the case dismissed, then they can't bring it to the grand jury. But if we do it before the year, then just like Dakota said, they can just bring a new arrest warrant up or bring it through the grand jury. Another, issue we talk about when it comes to arrest warrants is when you look at body cam, dash camera footage, how does that compare to the police report?
So one of the things we do in every single case, and DUIs always have body camera, is read the arrest warrant and compare it with what happened in that camera footage. So an officer can sometimes use boilerplate language, like talking about the driving and what he sees. There are some officers that every warrant reads exactly the same. I stopped this car, red shot, watery eyes, slurred speech, every case, whether it's there or not. And in doing so, in coming through that body camera, we are able to do what's called impeach an officer, or show that he has credibility issues for things that you can't see. If an officer says, I see red bloodshot watery eyes and slurred speech and the odor of alcohol, if you can impeach him or show a credibility issue on two of those things, but the body camera doesn't smell, we can show that the credibility is lacking there for that odor of alcohol also.
Yeah, and I guess that becomes important in many ways. One, in negotiations, because we could talk about all the issues with the state's case to say, hey, if we have a hearing or if we file a motion to suppress for lack of reasonable suspicion or lack of probable cause, we may win and we may get the case dismissed. And that helps create leverage, because whenever we talk about prosecution of criminal cases, the state has all the leverage in the world. They create the offer, and if you don't like the offer and you don't want to accept the offer, all you can do is put the officer on the stand and have a hearing. So the only way that you can get the prosecution to come down from their offer is to create leverage to make them come down to something that the client wants to potentially accept. Maybe a diversion that allows the case to be dismissed and expunged off their record. But if you're not getting the offer that you're happy with, then you need to be able to put that officer on the stand, show the credibility issues, show that they're not talking, that the police report does not align with what we see on the video, to potentially ask the judge to dismiss the case or to suppress evidence. So that definitely becomes really important as far as body cameras and police reports and comparing the two to find those discrepancies in every case. To create leverage, potentially file motions, potentially at a jury trial, it becomes important as well.